Oh, good evening. Welcome back to Dusty Feet. Thank you for being with me tonight. It's July 16th, 2026. And well, tonight we're continuing our Branches on the Vine series as we walk through the 10 words, right? Many of us grew up calling these the 10 Commandments. And as we've seen throughout this series, we're going to be using the work of the Bible Project as our launch point for our conversation. The link to that video and all those videos are in the description below. Please go listen to it. It is the source and the basis for this discussion. So tonight, we're going to come to the fifth commandment. Honor your father and your mother so that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh your Elohim gives you. So for many of us, this command was first explained when we were children, right? Listen to your parents, do what they tell you, don't talk back. And while childhood obedience may be part of the picture, the command itself reaches, well, much further. It's about where life comes from. It's about gratitude. It's about responsibility across generations. And then it sits in a very interesting place within the 10 words, right? Connecting how we relate to God and how we relate to others. So let's sit back, relax, wander a Dusty Feet path as we go through the fifth commandment. Our hope with the Dusty Feet is to foster discussion and to help build and support communities. If you're not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place for everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Substack. Link is in the description below. Designed around the written and spoken text, it's a place to connect to ourselves and others. 3. Facebook at Dusty Feet Journey. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And as always, 4. You're welcome to send an email to Bob at TheDustyFeet.com. These places, they will be moderated and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And of course, before we jump back in, quick reminder, if you find these discussions useful, please hit subscribe. But if you think someone else might enjoy exploring the scriptures the way we do, it's when you hit that like button, because that really does help more people discover this series. Because along the road, we're going to ask a lot of questions. Questions about the text, its context and history, about people, choices, patterns, meaning. The answers? We'll see where the dusty path leads. So the Bible Project begins by drawing attention to where the fifth commandment sits in the larger arrangement of those 10 words, right? The first 4 commands, they focus mainly on Yahweh's relationship with Israel. Honor him alone. Do not make physical representations of him. Do not carry his name for futile or destructive purposes. Remember the 7th day. Treat it as holy. And then the commands 6 through 10 move through more obviously right into relationships between people. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, do not bear false witness, and don't covet what belongs to someone else. And sitting between those 2 groups, this command, honor your father and your mother. So the Bible Project described it as a hinge, and I think that's a helpful image because a hinge connects 2 sides. And perhaps this command connects our understanding of Yahweh as the giver of life with, well, the way we treat people through whom life came to us. It brings worship and family into the same conversation. It suggests that how we respond to people connected to our beginning, I think it says something about how we understand life itself. I think that makes the command much more than just a household rule. I think it becomes a covenant question. What does it look like to receive life as a gift? And then how does that shape the way we treat people who carried, protected, taught, or even sustained us? Because listen again to the wording, right? Honor your father and your mother so that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh your Elohim gives you. So the Bible Project points out the repeated word, your. your father, your mother, your Elohim. So, father and mother are connected to the beginning of our lives. Yahweh is the one who ultimately gives life, and he gives Israel the land where that life can then flourish. Now, we know parents are not divine, right? They're human, limited, often imperfect. Some parents, they're loving and dependable. Some are complicated. Some are absent. Some have caused real harm. And the Bible's not naive about families. As we know, covering in our Outside the Class series, its scrolls are full of rivalry, favoritism, grief, betrayal, reconciliation, right? Those long running family wounds. So, this command is not pretending that every parent's behaved honorably, but it does recognize that the relationship itself, well, it's unique. None of us created ourselves. We entered the world through other people, right? Before we could walk, speak, feed ourselves, or even understand what danger was, we depended on someone. That doesn't mean that every person should receive the care um, that they, not everybody received the care they should have received. Does that make sense? Because truthfully and sadly, many did not and or do not. But this command still invites us to recognize that human life is received rather than self-generated, right? Because that idea alone, I think we need to slow down for. Because we live in a culture that loves the idea of the self-made person, right? But nobody's truly self-made, right? We inherited a body, a language, a family story, a culture. It's a world that's already in motion. Even the way we think was shaped by people who came before us. So honor might begin by acknowledging that, well, maybe we just didn't arrive here alone. The Hebrew word translated honor, it gives us another layer, right? The verb is kabed. It's from a Hebrew root connected with heaviness, weight, significance. To honor someone is to treat that person as weighty, right? Not easy to dismiss, not insignificant. They're not disposable. Truth is, we still use very similar language to that today. We might say someone's words carry weight. That decision is weighty. A matter deserves serious attention. So maybe honoring your mother and your father just means giving the relationship appropriate significance. It doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It does not mean pretending that the relationship is simple. But it does mean refusing to treat the people connected to our beginning, well, as though they don't matter. And I think we see in Scripture, honor's not merely an attitude. That honor, I think it becomes practical, right? The Bible Project connects this with Proverbs 14:31, right? The one who oppresses the poor taunts his maker, but the one who is generous to the needy honors him. So that proverb, it is a proverb, but that proverb connects the treatment of a person with the treatment of that person's creator. So to mistreat somebody made by God is, in some sense, I think it shows contempt for the one who made them, right? This goes along with the honoring the giver. So to care for someone vulnerable is to honor their maker. And I think that can help us see why the fifth commandment belongs near the center of these 10 words. How we treat people cannot be separated from how we claim to relate to God. And I think this becomes especially clear when we look at those teachings of Yeshua, right? Back in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, right? Jesus confronts a religious loophole that involves something, we'll get into it later, but it's called korban, right? It's a gift that's devoted to God. And the basic issue seems to be that these religious leaders are alluding to, that somebody could dedicate resources to God and then use that dedication as a reason to not support an aging father or mother. In other words, for them, I know you need help. I know these resources could support you, but they've been dedicated to God, so I really can't use them for you. On the surface, that might sound spiritual, but Jesus sees the contradiction. And then he says that by doing this, they're setting aside the word of God through their traditions. Now, truth, yes, that is a strong criticism because it raises an uncomfortable question. Happens more often than this. Can religious activity, any kind, can that activity become a way of avoiding ordinary responsibility? So apparently, in this example, to those religious leaders, well, that answer was yes. But it's possible to appear devoted to God while neglecting the people directly in front of us. And Jesus does not accept the idea that offering to God excuses the abandonment in this situation of a mother and a father. So for him, honoring parents includes that tangible care, right? It's one of the most practical parts of this command. That honor, it may involve respect, but it can also involve food, shelter, attention, financial support, advocacy, maybe just presence. Because this command, it moves out of theory that talking to somebody or thinking about someone, and it moves to ordinary life. And I think that then brings us to one of the main ideas in this Bible Project video. It's the reciprocal care. Right? When children are young, they need almost everything. They need food, protection, instruction, comfort, time, quite a bit of patience. And they receive care long before they understand what that care costs. But as the years pass, the relationship may begin to change. I mean, children, they do become adults. Parents grow older. Strength and then fade. Health, well, that becomes fragile. And the people who once carried us, they may need help being carried through, well, a different season in life. In the Fifth Commandment, it actually creates room for this care to flow back. But it's not a business transaction. It's not as if anyone could just calculate the value of every meal, every late night, every sacrifice, and come up with a figure, right? It's more relational than that. Life was sustained through care. And now that sustainment, that care, that's returned. So that kind of reciprocity, right? It helps us then, I think it helps us explain the promise that's attached to this command. I think it kind of gives it frame and shape so that your days may be prolonged in the land. This is the only one actually of the 10 words that have any kind of promise. So it may be tempting to hear it only as for an individual, right? Honor your parents and you'll personally live a very long life. And well, you know what? That does not seem to actually play out. So maybe the language is meant to seem broader than that. Remember, Israel is being taught how to remain a healthy covenant community in that land. And a people then can endure, those people can continue, those people will flourish when the generations care for one another, right? Parents care for children. Children later care for parents. The old share memories. They share wisdom. The young, oh, they bring strength, energy, and they are the future. So the command is not about one family, one person. It is about the kind of community that Israel was meant to become. And then that connection between generations and memory, well, that matters, and that's told throughout all of Scripture, right? Israel is repeatedly told to remember. Remember the Exodus. Remember the wilderness. Remember the covenant. Remember what Yahweh has done. And then, as it says in Torah, then teach these things to your children. So maybe biblical faith is meant to travel across generations. But that depends on relationship, right? The older generation must be willing to tell the story. The younger generation, they must be willing to listen. And I think each must believe that the other has something worth receiving. So when the young dismiss the old as irrelevant, a community, that's when I think a community begins to lose its memory. And then when the old dismiss the young as foolish, well, the community begins to then lose its future, its direction, its heading. So the Fifth Commandment presses against both of those contempts for each other. And it places the generations in the relationship with one another. They have to work together. But that doesn't mean that every old idea is wise from the elderly. It doesn't mean every new idea is foolish from the young. It simply means that no generation is meant to live as though that generation invented the world. The young, they need the stories of those who walked before them, right? The old, they need to know that the story, it's going to continue beyond them and their generation. So perhaps long life in the land includes the sense of continuity. Not just individuals surviving, but it's the people that are remembering who they are, where they came from. Now we know also here, we get this, especially where they came from, that this command becomes complicated for many people, right? To be real, to be true. Because for some, honor your mother and your father, that brings a warm memory. It's a safe home. Faithful parents, grandparents who prayed, taught, encouraged, they showed up. But for others, this command, it touches painful places. Neglect, abandonment, manipulation, addiction, harshness, abuse, right? Some people have even had this command used against them as a way to silence questions or prevent them from speaking truth about what had happened. So what does honor mean in those situations? Because it can't mean pretending harm didn't happen. It can't mean calling evil good. It can't mean remaining in danger. And it can't mean giving someone unlimited access to your life simply because they're a parent. Honor and obedience are not always the same thing, especially once a child becomes an adult. Genesis describes a man leaving his father and mother and forming a new household with his wife, right? I was just at a wedding the other day, and the cleaving part was actually part of a discussion, so it seems appropriate here. The relationship changes. Responsibility changes. Honor, it remains, right? But the adult children are not called to remain children forever. So sometimes honor may look like speaking truth, just without being cruel. Sometimes it involves a necessary boundary. Sometimes it might mean making sure that an aging parent is not abandoned, yet still limiting contact that has become harmful over time. Sometimes it just may mean just refusing to have revenge. And then sometimes it might mean actually grieving the relationship, the one we wish we had. We just didn't get it. But there's no single formula that works. This is nothing that's going to work for every single family, right? That's where wisdom, prayer, and trusted counsel matter. And maybe perhaps the idea of giving the relationship weight still helps us. Because a weighty relationship is not handled casually. We don't deny what happened. We don't pretend that every wound has healed. But neither do we reduce the other person to just a caricature, right? If there's another way for us to faithfully handle it moving forward. Because that may be one of the harder forms of honor, right? Because it's not an easy agreement. It's not a false peace. But maybe it's just truth without contempt. The Bible Project also suggests that Jesus expands the scope of the family, right? He takes the Fifth Commandment seriously, Jesus, as we've already seen, right? But he also creates a larger family around this allegiance to his Father. So at one point, when told that his mother and his brothers are outside, right, Jesus looks at those around him and then he says, whoever does the will of God is his brother, sister, mother. But I don't think he's erasing the biological family. I tend to believe, like the Bible Project, that he's widening the circle, right? The early Jesus movement became a place where people who were not related by blood could begin to live as a family. Widows were cared for, elders were respected, resources were shared. Those without strong family support could become part of a covenant household. I think that's what gives the Fifth Commandment a wider social scape, right? The people of God were called to esteem the elderly, care for the widows, give the appropriate honor to those who have poured their lives into ours. And yes, that may include biological parents, but it may also include grandparents, teachers, mentors, right? Spiritual mothers and fathers. Faithful people who carried the story before we arrived. But we need to remember, fair, right? That language should be used carefully because sadly in our time it's true, spiritual authority can be abused. No leader should be treated as unquestionable. Still, I think it's worth recognizing that many of us received life in more than one sense, right? Someone did teach us. Someone encouraged us. Someone opened the scriptures. Someone listened when we were struggling. And someone made room for us at the table. So I think honor includes maybe gratitude for those gifts. I think it just reminds us that what we did, that we did not become who we are again alone. We didn't make this place. So what might this command look like in practice, right? As my dad says, today in my life. Maybe begins with just attention, right? A phone call, a visit, maybe listening to a story that we may have heard before. Maybe asking questions about the family history while there is still time to ask. Because I think attention can be a form of honor because it says, in that attention, your life matters. Because in that, honor can just look like gratitude. And that's not pretending that everything's perfect. It's just naming what's good. Thank you for working. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for trying, even when you did not always get it right. And then in that just goes to practical care, right? Helping with appointments, providing a meal, offering transportation, assisting with finances, helping work through confusing paperwork. Making sure that someone is not isolated. These things that we're talking about, we know, yeah, they're not dramatic. But I think they may be closer to what Jesus had in mind when he challenged those who used religious language to avoid supporting their parents. And in more difficult families, that honor is going to look different. Because in that, it may involve careful boundaries. It may involve honest conversation. It may involve appropriate distance. Or it just might be choosing not to pass harmful patterns on to the next generation. I think that last one is worth considering because every family hands something down. Some things are gifts. Some things are wounds. So perhaps one way of honoring the family story is to preserve what's good and then to refuse to continue what was destructive. Right? We might say, this was life-giving. That I will carry forward. This caused harm. And with God's help, it's going to stop right here. Right? That does not erase the past. But maybe it can help change what the next generation then receives. Is that fair? Stepping back, I like to do this. The Fifth Commandment seems to be doing several things at once. I mean, it stands as a hinge between the love of God and the love of neighbor. It reminds us that life is received. It calls us to treat our mothers and our fathers as weighty relationships. And then it gives honor a practical shape through care, some kind of support. And it connects the health of a community with the way generations sustain one another. Yeah. Jesus takes the command seriously enough to challenge religious traditions that allowed people to be something as simple as avoid caring for their parents. And at the same time, he widens the meaning of family. He helps create a community where those without that strong biological support, well, they could still belong. So perhaps the question isn't simply, have I shown respect? Maybe it's, how am I giving appropriate weight to the people through whom God has brought life, care, wisdom, or faith into my story? So for one person, the answer just may be gratitude. For another, it just may be practical support. For another, it's that difficult but honest conversation. For somebody else, it might be a boundary. For another, maybe it's just sitting down, listening, right? These situations, they're going to differ. But the command invites us to see care as a part of worship, right? Not the flashy worship, not public worship. It's that quieter kind. It's that in the closet time. It's found in kitchens, hospital rooms, phone calls, shared meals, the sitting in patient attention. And maybe that's why this command sits where it does. It fits right in between our relationship with God and our relationship with our neighbor. Because sometimes the hinge between the two, well, it's found in the care of those closest to us. Thank you for being with me tonight in the Dusty Feet. This conversation's been useful. Please subscribe, like, but share it with someone who may want to walk this road with us. So until next time, keep reading slowly. Keep asking better questions. Keep looking for connection, context, community in these things. And as always, keep your dusty feet. Shalom, shalom.